Hello, I'm Charles Clausen, your host of the AMPx Podcast, a show where we engage in conversations with entrepreneurs and innovators whose wild ideas and exponential thinking are reshaping the universe where we live, play, and work. I believe these powerful conversations will inspire you to pursue your dreams. So we're excited today to have Mitchell Hora as a special guest. Mitchell is an entrepreneur. He's been running Continuum Ag for over 7 years as CEO.
Yeah.
And he's an Iowa State graduate, focused on agricultural systems technology, agronomy, and crop science.
Yeah.
And, he's doing a lot of exciting things, which we're going to dig into today. What I like to do, Mitchell, with all of our guests is to start with, in your younger years, what inspired you to become an entrepreneur, an innovator, and a disruptor? What motivated you, and where did you get your passion from?
Yeah, my younger years, not very long ago. I'm 28 years old now as we sit here today. So, my younger years are still now, I hope. But no. Looking back on it, I've always been an entrepreneur. I didn't know it at the time. I didn't know what my path was going to be. But looking back, I actually started my first company when I was 4 years old, selling lemonade. There's pictures of little me at the farmer's markets. Of my mom and grandma are really great bakers and always had big gardens and everything. So I grew up going to the farmer's market on the square in Washington, down in southeast Iowa. And so they'd go to the square and have all their stuff, and I'd have a little lemonade stand off to the side and sell lemonade for 50 cents a cup, and made a little bit of side money that way. But figuring out, how to put a sign together and how to charge and count money and all that kind of stuff and interact with customers. I guess I've been doing it since I was really tiny. And I don't know what I was using the money on or nothing, buying toys or something like that. Right. Nothing productive. But started with that, and then when I got into junior high and high school and all that, I was renting some farm ground. I had hogs. I had pigs and stuff.
This was in high school you were doing
junior high school, yeah. So had pigs and stuff for the county and state fair, and a small little enterprise off that, and make a little bit of money anyway. With show pigs, you don't really make money, but at least going through how to set up a budget and how to do the financing and how to have somewhat of a little business. I had a hay business as well. So would bale hay from our edges of our fields and our waterways and stuff like that. So some conservation stuff, but then selling hay to some of my neighbors. And then I was working and doing technology stuff as well. But always had different things going on. It was never an actual company and have everything all very official, but now looking back on it,
a one-kid show where Mitchell's just out there.
Well, I'd recruit all my siblings, and I'm the oldest of 5 siblings. So my 4 younger siblings, always got recruited in. But actually now, as we fast forward to today, 3 out of my 4 siblings all have their own companies now as well. And my wife has her own company, and I think between my wife and I, we have 7 LLCs or something like that.
Wow.
So 7 different kind of things, and not all of them are major deals. My main thing is Continuum Ag, but what I've learned is I'm an entrepreneur, and will continue to build and start and grow companies, and I need to learn a lot about utilizing people and delegating and organizing myself, and that's where you and I have really connected on getting me started on that. I've got a long way to go. One of my major things I got to work on here for the next year, but being a visionary and seeing opportunity, that is my thing.
Just for our audience, Mitchell's current vision is to support 1 million farmers in becoming more profitable and sustainable. And that's a nice start. So you might tell us a little bit about Continuum Ag, kind of how you came up with the idea, how it's evolved over the last 7 years, and then we'll dig into that a little deeper.
Yeah, so kind of was laying up there, with growing up, going through high school, all that kind of stuff, being involved in the family farm. I'm actually 7th generation on our family's farm that's down in southeast Iowa, Washington County, a little way south of where we are right now, but fairly small family farm, 700 acres. It's nothing too big, average or just below average type size to be a standalone family operation. It's a row crop farm, so corn, soybeans, just like everybody else in Iowa. But the difference on ours is we've been very focused on conservation for a long time, using no-till since 1978, using cover crops since 2013, and now those two practices are really the core of what's now coined as regenerative ag, where we're regenerating that soil and building it up, but that's a different deal. I went to Iowa State because that's what my family's always done. I'm like number 19 in my family to go to Iowa State. I never did a tour. I never did an official visit or nothing. I grew up going to football games and stuff up there and had been to campus plenty of times. And it wasn't even like an option. I never considered anything else. It was that's just what we do. We go to Iowa State. And all 4 of my younger siblings all have gone through Iowa State. My brother's a senior up there right now. All 3 of my sisters all have graduated from up there. Pretty much all my cousins as well. Like, it's just what we do. So I think now I think my brother's probably number 20, 25, 26, direct, like in the Hora lineage to go through Iowa State. So long-term legacy of all that. But found agronomy and ag systems technology, had an internship where I learned about crop consulting, and that's where Continuum Ag was started as just a concept. And the original concept had nothing to do with helping a million farmers or nothing. It was have a small consulting company here in southeast Iowa, do soil sampling and basic crop consulting, helping farmers, be involved in the family operation and die. That was my plan. Consult, farm a little bit, die. That was the extent of the plan. I had no idea, what we really wanted to do. Now, of course, it's technology, software, very much thinking scale and thinking bigger impact.
So you graduated 7.5, 8 years ago.
Yeah.
In the crop sciences and the ag systems technology, was AI and machine learning even a word back in those days?
No, I'm sure it was a word. It was a word, but when
was it a concept that you studied or learned about? Or?
No, I haven't taken classes in like any of this stuff, but like regenerative ag was not a thing. Soil health was not really a thing. So I started Continuum Ag in 2015 is when we technically kind of launched. And the story there is I was at a different internship up in central Minnesota, went to a conference and met some consultants from South Africa. And these guys were working on this Haney soil health test, which I had just spent my whole summer studying and working on and trying to figure out how to utilize the data. And I'd built some systems around it and had been doing a lot of work. I said, hey, send me the data that you've got. I'll help you out and I'll take a look. And they said, I was back in Ames at this point, back up at school. And I helped them out and they said, okay, send us an invoice. And I was like, I don't know how to do that. So that's when I went to
charge you? That's a novel concept.
Yeah, that's why I'm like, wait, make money for this. That sounds good. So I went to the ag entrepreneurial office up there. Dr. Kevin Kimley is the guy who still directs all that. I'm still very close with. And he helped me through it. I've been to South Africa twice and still working with those guys today. So that was 2015. Graduated in 2017, just doing the consulting. We launched the software in early 2020, and now it's machine learning, building in big data systems, and really cranking up the opportunities to utilize all this data. I think in agriculture overall, we've been collecting data for a long time, 20, 30 years plus.
Right.
We've never really used it. And now finally getting to the point where we can really use the data.
Well, I want to pause for a minute. The primary purpose of the AMPx Podcast is to talk to entrepreneurs and innovators whose wild ideas and exponential thinking are helping to reshape the universe where we live, work, and play. And I think the point I'd like to make to our audience is, 5-7 years ago, when you were graduating from one of the top ag schools in the country, these exponential technologies like AI and machine learning weren't even really on the discussion board. And today they're becoming mainstream. So part of our challenge in the AMPx podcast is to stimulate curiosity of people to learn about these convergence of technologies. And you're using a lot of AI and machine learning to help farmers, but the farmers are steeped in generational. You mean your family's had the farm for 7 years, traditions and ways of doing things. Yeah. And even though you can prove scientifically that you can save over $105 an acre and reduce costs by using these techniques, it's still scary. So let's talk about
change is scary.
Yeah. So you probably have one of the more conservative groups of customers in one of the most conservative states in the nation.
For sure.
Let's talk about, tell us about TopSoil, the database, and what you're doing to try to give insights into soil health. Then we'll talk about, the change and overcoming the fear of change. Because I think that's what humans struggle with on so many levels.
That's right. So started the company, graduated 2017, to be back around Southeast Iowa, had already had things really up and going so that when I graduated, we were off and running and really hit the ground running, and was very fortunate to be in a position to do so. And was just doing consulting though, for the most part. Soil sampling is basically how I made money. It's a very low margin business, very labor intensive, not a scalable thing. That was still not any part of the conversation. At this point, it was still maybe get a couple employees, which I did hire 3 full-time employees in 2018, which is the biggest mistake that I've made. They're great people. I'm still buddies with them. I talked to one of them actually on my drive up here. Still friends with the 3. But I didn't understand scaling at the right pace. And what I most did not understand is don't just hire people. You have to have processes built first and then figure out how to scale and automate components of the process to somebody that it can be delegated away to. And I didn't even have the process built. I was just like, cool, look at all this. We're making money. This is awesome. I need to hire a bunch of people and let's just do more. And they'll figure it out. And most employees can't just figure it out. They've got to have systems and processes, and that's why most people aren't entrepreneurs, and why I know that I am.
So at that time, when you kept hiring more employees and taking on more work, I assume you went from 50 hours a week to 60 hours a week to 70 hours a week as you hired these employees, but they couldn't keep up, so you just had to step up and fill the gap.
That's right, and the revenue did not grow at that type of pace, but the expenses massively grew, and again, it learned a lot. Good people, still friends, but core thing number one before hiring is have processes, even if they're very simple, or as you're getting people brought in, to have them help to build the processes. So
let's talk about that. Let's dig into that a little deeper. So you hired people, you didn't have the processes. Did these people have the skills to develop the processes you needed?
No,
or
because
they were just warm bodies that could work hard, but they didn't know how to get you to where you needed to go.
No, yeah, they were warm bodies, and they were 21-year-olds too, just like me, just fresh out of Iowa State as well. And they didn't know how to do this stuff. They're not entrepreneurs, and had some skills to be able to do tasks, but had no idea that we needed to figure out processes and like how to build some of these systems. And so we started getting that figured out, but that also then led to TopSoil. And back to your original question, and because task number one was, how do we deliver this program and this soil health data? How do we deliver it to a customer so that it brings value, so it can be implemented and used, so we can show them return on investment, and so we could actually scale? And because at this point, I would get the results back from the soil lab. So we would collect some soil, mail it to a lab. They would email us back the results. And I would spend hours digging into the data and writing these detailed emails to my customers about how to read the results, and I would attach the results to the email. And then I would talk to those customers later. They'd be asking me, and I'd be like, well, yeah, did you get my email and see all my information? And they're like, oh yeah, I got that, but yeah, I didn't read, all the details in there. So I was spending hours putting together these long reports and all this information. And
that no one looked at.
Well, they're farmers. Of course they're not going to look at it. They're not going to sit down and read this, half-hour long email to try to figure out how to read this soil report. They needed to have somebody to sit down and walk through it with them, but also they needed it to be visual. Because as farmers, we're used to seeing the map.
Right.
And data goes red, yellow, green on the map. Red is bad, yellow is average, green is good. That's how we think as farmers. We've been trained now with the data tools to be able to have that visualization. So it prompted building our own software, and that's now TopSoil. And now we have the largest data set of this soil health data. We have farms in 42 states and 20 countries. And now we can really do the fun stuff, what I call it, of utilizing this AI, utilizing this technology to do something with the data and reverse engineer environmental outcomes, reverse engineer profit metrics, yield metrics, productivity metrics, and utilize weather data with soil, with management, with integration of other scalable and real-time technologies to really be able to utilize all this information. And what we call ourselves now is we're a soil health data intelligence company. And I think that was key. And I learned it from a mentor of mine who was in the Marines for a long time, military guys, who helped me to come to the realization we're not a soil health data company, we're a soil health data intelligence company. Because farmers have tons of data, and it's everywhere. And sure, we can help farmers gather data, but the key thing that we bring is intelligence, which is what to do with the data.
So how many acres do you have in topsoil today?
About 850,000.
850,000. So with 1 million farmers, how many acres will you have in topsoil?
About 1 billion.
1 billion acres.
Yep.
That's pretty exciting.
That's huge. Okay, so our BHAG, our big hairy audacious goal is to help 1 million farmers profit from improving their soil health. And this was really clear to me, and I think you and I have talked multiple times on the key breakthrough in building the company, creating scale, communicating with now investors, and developing goals and bringing people on board is we've got to have a vision and a where are we going. And I didn't have this at the beginning. Remember, my vision at the beginning was here's this consulting company, I guess, and I'm just going to kind of have that and farm a little bit and die. That was the vision. Well, that's not that exciting.
Now, when did we start working together?
So that would have been
2019?
Maybe late 19.
So just for our audience, I'm on Mitchell's advisory board, and I'm also kind of a strategic coach.
Yeah.
I'm probably the only one in the business that has no technology background in agriculture. I'm the disruptive innovator. Yeah. I've been pushing Mitchell to think about exponential, which means 10 times, 10x, which is 1,000%.
Yeah.
So, how do you generate huge benefits? That's right. And how do you impact a lot of people? So he's talking about an impact of 1 billion acres.
Yeah.
And, right now where you have clinical sites, I think you're close to $110 an acre savings just on reduced fertilizer cost and inputs. You take 100 times 1 billion and you come up with a big number. So let's talk about the challenges of scaling and getting 1 million farmers to bring 1 billion acres into this. That's $100 billion. That's not chicken feed.
Yeah.
But there's resistance, even though there's such huge economic impact.
Yep. The pain of change is currently way more than the pain of staying the same. And the pain of staying the same in agriculture is pretty high right now. We're at all-time high input costs for fertilizer, chemicals, land, all this stuff, labor, very expensive. But we're able to overcome that and bear that pain of staying the same because commodity prices are so good.
Right.
as far as corn prices and stuff, and selling into the market, you can make pretty good money, even with high input costs and inflation driving everything up. Because the value of the outcome is really solid, it's okay, and you can still make money.
So the war in Ukraine helps that because supply is down.
Yep.
So
The war in
demand is
Ukraine,
there,
weather
prices are
issues.
up. But what disruptive event could come along that could cause commodity prices to fall? I mean, is that something that could happen in the next 10 years?
I think so. I mean, it just overall global recession type issues and stuff. Especially as you're looking at like in China, with if they don't have all the money, they're not going to be buying as much pork, and where's a lot of our grain go into pork in China. Mm-hmm. So that's a major potential issue. Any of like just in war with China, Russia, like that's going to impede a lot of that stuff. It can be a major problem. Also, a lot of our grains today go into renewable fuels. I think renewable fuels are still going to be a thing for a long, long time. But if they're not, with electric vehicles and stuff.
Vehicles and solar power.
Yeah. Which, of course, that stuff is going to continue to go. But it's a long, long way away from having any real scale.
So that's more than 10 years out before it becomes a major disruptor.
Yeah. And it seems like there's still going to be a major play in this space, because even if it's not necessarily ethanol for gas-powered vehicles, it's still going to be renewable diesel for bigger trucks and such, and sustainable aviation fuel for airlines and all that. Those are going to be much slower to get to electric. So there's likely still a play on some of those other alternative fuels, even if it's not just ethanol to be blended in for fuel, for just gasoline.
So what's the profile of the early adopters, the innovators, the farmers that are using this? I mean, you guys have been doing it for a long time and seeing the benefits. I mean, the benefits are huge, not only in reduced cost, but the soil retention in the soil. You might talk about the early adopters and some of the other benefits that in a drought, because of the regenerative cover crops and everything else, you maintain soil moisture so the crops survive when the neighbors die. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, we're definitely seeing it. So the overall thing here, okay, so back to kind of the big vision and growth and stuff too with this is, so it's 1 million farmers globally. Is a heck of a lot. There's a lot of people involved in agriculture, but the billion acreage number is that in our simple math and simple metrics, 1 million farmers at 1,000 acres each is 1 billion. Mm-hmm. Today, our average farmer is about that, about 1,000 acres each. Most farmers in the world do not farm 1,000 acres. Most of them farm maybe 1 acre or less.
In Africa, they might be
farmers.
2 or 3 hectares.
That's right, or less. But our simple math still needs to be 1,000 acres. 1 million farmers, 1,000 acres is 1 billion acres. It's about 5 billion acres of ag land total in the world.
Row crops, there's 5 billion acres, or
total agriculture.
All crops.
Everything. Okay. Everything. Okay. And really, the 1 million farmers mostly means as many as possible, and global, and scale, and disruptive, like the point of your question. Not just Midwest, Iowa farmers, Total in the U.S., there's about 2 million farms.
Okay.
So, but getting 50% market share in the U.S. is really tough. John Deere, I suppose, has maybe 50% market share.
Is that because there's just so many farmers that are never going to adopt, in this lifetime, they're not going to adopt this? They'll have to wait for the next generation.
I think they will. In this lifetime, we're not going to have 50% adoption. That'd be pushing it. That would be like the extreme in my lifetime to have 50% adoption of these things. I think we can get there. I think we'll get close to that. But to have everybody doing anything all the same is likely not realistic. Although, like to your current question, it is better. And my overall thesis is farmers will do regenerative ag because it's better. It's more year-to-year profitable. It's more resilient against drought, against weather issues. It's what the consumer is wanting. It's risk adverse to these outside forces. It enables your operation to have more freedom and be more in control and not as susceptible to these outside influences. And it's just different. And I think that's the biggest barrier to getting people to change. Is it's just different. It's just like anything else. I mean, it's just that barrier, that adoption curve just takes time. And the biggest issue is that if you don't know what you're doing, you can really screw this up and not gain that $100 an acre like what we oftentimes see that we can do. But you could easily lose $100 an acre or worse. And that's
you
what
really
we did
need
in our first year.
a coach or a guide to help you through the process until
Exactly.
you understand it.
And that's where we found is our role at Continuum Ag. We're the how-to. We show you, here's where you are, and here's what to do. That's it. Here's where you are, point A. Here's point B. Here's how you do it. And that is the ultimate thing that's been missing is there's less than 4% of farms in the country that are doing cover crops today. Cover crops being one of those main practices here. And in my checklist of items, if you're going to be a regenerative farmer, kind of one of the pieces that's kind of at the minimum is you got to be doing cover crops.
Explain to our audience what a cover crop
Yeah.
is, Mitchell, so they understand.
So most of the time we plant our crop in the spring and we harvest it in the fall. And then over the winter time, nothing is out there. It's just bare. And so in a lot of farms till that soil and they incorporate the residue to prepare the soil for the next spring. In a regenerative system, you don't do any tillage in order to maintain the armor on the soil and don't disturb that soil microbiome and that structure.
Right.
And instead, you plant some cover crops to survive over the winter time to maintain a living root in that system. And that living root is resemblance of the natural prairie system that always had a living root. And that had a lot of diverse living roots. Mm-hmm. And that didn't have that tillage and didn't have that disruption. So we've got to keep those living roots to keep photosynthesizing as many days out of the year as we can, pulling carbon from the atmosphere and pumping it into the ground. Because microbes eat simple carbon.
So what are typical cover crops in Iowa?
The main one is called cereal rye. It's just a grass, but it's a grass that can grow at as low as 35 degrees Fahrenheit.
So it's still growing right now because it's
still growing right now. Yep, so we're probably right about that here today. So you can drive around the countryside and you can see some green fields every once in a while. Those green fields are most likely cereal rye. And cereal rye is used because it's pretty cheap, but it's pretty cost effective and pretty hardy as a winter cover crop. And because, of course, here in southeast Iowa, we're going to be frozen up for a good chunk of the winter. We're going to have snow. We're going to have ice. It's not going to be great conditions. There's lots and lots of types of cover crops, dozens. Mm-hmm. And we've experimented with probably 25 different species because in having diversity is really key. Different diverse species pump diverse compounds into the soil to feed diverse microbiome, just like within our gut. That's why you need to eat a diverse, balanced diet and all that. We're made out of the same things that the soil is. We're all microbes. And so we've got to keep those diverse living roots out there as much as we can to protect that soil, to feed the microbiome so that they can cycle nutrients and help us to have a more living system, while at the same time we are drawing down carbon, improving water quality, reducing erosion, and improving the nutrient cycles so that we can cut back on our synthetic inputs and so we can have healthier crops with more nutrient density to provide a more nutritious feed source into the world.
So the cover crops, this rye, how many tons of carbon would an acre of rye pull back into the soil in a fall or in a season?
So we did some samples on some of our rye here this year that was full maturity. Okay, so it was about 5 foot tall, pretty thick, and we were harvesting some of this rye. Mm-hmm. And at that point, if I remember right, I don't have the notes in front of me here, but it was about 12,000 pounds of total biomass out there. Mm-hmm. And this is only above ground, so not including the roots. So the stuff we could see above ground per acre was about 12,000 pounds. And then we ran an analysis on that, and it was about 4,000 pounds carbon.
Wow, that's huge.
Now that
4,000 pounds of
4,000
carbon.
two
So
tons
you had
per acre.
8,000 pounds of biomass, which is the stalks
12,000
and the
12,000 pounds. Yep, 12,000 pounds of biomass.
Oh, plus 4,000 pounds of
No,
carbon.
4,000 pounds of that biomass was carbon. So of all that biomass, it would have been water, it would have been nitrogen, phosphorus, all the material. But as a grass plant, it's mostly carbon, because that carbon in the plant is part of the actual cell walls. It's part of the chlorophyll. It's part of the actual stalks and lignin. Like most of that plant material is carbon. And the total plant was like 12,000 pounds of biomass, 12,000 pounds of actual material per acre. But as carbon itself, it was like 4,000 pounds. So that's not CO2 equivalents and like carbon credits and stuff. That's actual pounds of carbon, elemental carbon, above ground. Now, when all that breaks down and decomposes, most of it is going to be respired back into the atmosphere as the microbes chew on it, and then they respire it back off, and basically breathe it back out just like we do. When we eat, we're breathing back, we're respiring back out.
So how much of that 4,000 pounds is captured in the soil?
I'm not sure. That's what we got to find out. And we also have to find out, of all that 4,000 pounds, that's in the above ground, how much did I get pumped into the below ground through the roots or the roots themselves as they get eaten up and as they decompose, how much is contributed into the soil? And I don't know yet exactly. But based on our soil samples from the last 10 years, we have built our soil carbon, our stable soil carbon, what is accumulated in the ground. We've built that at a rate of about 4.9 metric tons of carbon per acre per year. So for the last 10 years, about 49 tons of carbon built up into our soil to a depth of 1 meter deep in the last 10 years.
Well,
Per acre, 49 tons.
If you do the math and you take 49 tons and take it times a billion, you got 49 billion tons. Take that times 2, and you've got trillions of pounds of carbon that have been put back in the earth. And carbon has a little impact on climate change.
Yeah, so that's the big one of the big greenhouse gases, of course, and a big part of where agriculture can contribute to these solutions. Today, the food and ag industry is about 24% of the global carbon footprint. Okay, 24% of the global carbon footprint, food and ag. In the U.S., agriculture alone is about 10% of the U.S. carbon footprint. Then you'd have the food supply chain and stuff, which would probably get us closer to that 24% of the U.S. footprint as well. But huge chunk of it, and out of the carbon footprint, actually a big chunk is actually from our nitrous oxide emissions from nitrogen fertilizer. That's actually about 60% of the carbon footprint of a bushel of corn. About 60% of the carbon footprint comes from the nitrogen fertilizer.
So on your farm, Mitchell, with your cover crops and your regenerative processes, how much have you reduced the nitrogen fertilizer from pre-regenerative to today? How many pounds or tons per acre?
We've reduced by about, on average, by about 60 to 80 pounds per acre, from an average of anywhere from 220 to 240 pounds per acre, which is very standard. The universities still teach that it takes 1 pound of nitrogen to produce 1 bushel of corn. Okay, so if we want to grow 240 bushel corn, which would be standard for a lot of farms, so to have a goal like that, if you're going to grow 240 bushel corn, you need 240 pounds of nitrogen. But what we were missing and what's not being taught is that 1 pound of nitrogen per bushel doesn't all come from the fertilizer. It's supposed to come from the natural system. And we've been able to incentivize that natural system, build that natural system, and therefore we don't have to buy all this synthetic fertilizer. We can get it from the natural system. Above every acre of soil, there's 14,000 tons of nitrogen.
above 1 acre, there's 14,000 tons
in the atmosphere. The atmosphere is 70% nitrogen. 70%. Okay, so for carbon, CO2, the atmosphere is like 415 part per million or something like that. I don't know what the latest numbers are, but about 415 part per million, which is like less than 0.5% or something like that. I don't know what the math would be. Less than half, very, very small amount of our atmosphere is actually carbon in these greenhouse gases. 70% of the atmosphere is nitrogen. And that's one of our biggest expenses on the farm every year is buying nitrogen.
So if you can pull it out of the air, it's for free.
For free. And the good thing is that legume plants pull it out of the air for free.
So what would be examples of those that you would use in Iowa?
Soybeans, clover, like red clover, white clover and stuff like we get in our yards, alfalfa. We use, as cover crops, we use hairy vetch, cowpeas, sun hemp. There's lots of types of legumes. And how legumes work is that they create symbiotic relationships with microbes that fix nitrogen. These microbes can take that atmospheric nitrogen and put it into their cell bodies and pull it down and convert it from a unusable gaseous form to a plant available form in the soil. Because most of the nitrogen in the atmosphere is just N2 gas. N2 gas we can't use. We're not using it right now to create protein to grow big muscles and stuff, and plants aren't necessarily directly using it for their own metabolism. But a microbe can take that N2 gas, convert it into nitrate, ammonium, and more so into organic nitrogen forms that can then be broken down. And we've seen that we can now get into our soils with just our cover crops and our soybeans upwards of 120 pounds of nitrogen into our soil from the atmosphere in just the top 6 inches of our soil every year.
Wow. So
now I can grow bigger corn yields, spend less money on synthetic fertilizer, build my nitrogen in my soil, but build it in an organic form so it's not an issue for water quality, because we don't want a bunch of just nitrogen out there because it's a big water quality problem. But I can build it as an organic nitrogen in my soil and utilize that to keep growing bigger corn yields more sustainably with that 14,000 tons. It's already up here. I just need to capture it. But the key thing is that most farmers, we're told and are taught in the current ag system, only quantifies the inorganic nitrogen that's in the soil, which is nitrates and ammonium. The nitrogen that I'm talking is organic nitrogen. Amino acids, proteins, enzymes, and the definition of an organic compound from organic chemistry is it's got a carbon attached to it. That's the only difference. Inorganic nitrogen is just no carbon attached. It's just a element that's out there. That nitrate is NO3 and ammonium NH4, nitrate and Jesus, now I'm screwing it all up.
I'm going to be no help here.
But nitrate NO3 and I'm screwing it up. N2, whatever. So I'm looking like the worst agronomist ever, but I'm just all fired up and talking over. But nitrate and ammonium, no carbon attached, versus this organic nitrogen with carbon attached. And now we can quantify it with the Haney test that we specialize in and show farmers a map with that data so that they can utilize that new pool to create better intelligence around managing their synthetic fertilizer inputs and keep those dollars in their pocket.
Follow-up question. I'm curious about these biomes, these organisms that collaborate with these cover crops to capture the carbon. What are they? What are these biomes these look like? What are they?
So that are capturing the nitrogen or the carbon?
The carbon.
Well, so the carbon...
Or maybe I'm confused.
The nitrogen is what we were first talking. So the legumes utilize the microbes in the soil to capture the nitrogen out of the soil.
Which feeds the plants that are coming.
It's going to feed the plants back. So the plant So the microbes interact with the plants because microbes eat simple compounds like sucrose, fructose, glucose, simple sugars. They do the same thing in our gut. But we can chew and use our saliva to break it down from cellulose or from a carbohydrate. We can break it down, start the process so that when it's in our actual gut, now it's those simple compounds that our body can actually absorb. But we have to start it with a physical chewing process with our saliva to start breaking down the system. In the soil, those microbes don't have the ability to do that. They exude some enzymes and they can break it down into some simple compounds and still interact with it. But the plant needs to be pumping those simple sugars into the soil. And the plant wants to pump those simple sugars into the soil because the more microbes that it can get living and dying and decomposing around its roots, it can absorb those nutrients from that plant or from those microbes dying or being pooped back out or whatever,
Yep.
Not actually pooped back out, but basically
discharged,
and exuded, and those nutrients left over, and the plant can take those in. So the more microbes that it can get around it, interacting with the soil and getting the nutrients, the more it's got available to grow.
Do you ever have to supplement the microbes to work with these legumes?
We do now. So like there's inoculants. You can buy some of these specific microbial products and stuff. But for the most part, especially here in Iowa, we have a lot of them naturally in our soils. Now we've played with a lot of these biological products, and some of them do create great advantages for us to get more of the good guys into our system. And especially if you're early into a regenerative program and you don't have those good guys, it can really help you to get them. Just like taking probiotics.
Right.
When you're eating healthy and you're really rocking and rolling, you probably don't need the probiotic anymore, or the vitamin, or all that medicine and stuff.
Because you've got a good population.
Because you've got it. Yeah, you've got them. Same thing in the soil. There's trillions and trillions of microbes out there. Throw in a couple billion extra of the good guys, okay, maybe that'll help. But most of them are going to be annihilated right away. But hopefully over time, you get some of the good guys built up. But the main bacteria that the legumes work with to get the nitrogen is called Bradyrhizobia. So it's just little nitrogen fixing microbes, and they create little spherical colonies on the edges of these plant roots because they need the sugar from the plants, and it's only legume type plants that can get them the correct sugars that they need, and they create these little colonies on the plant roots, and we can see them with the naked eye, these little colonies. And by forcing our legumes to work better, by having them out there with cover crops and stuff and with the diverse system, we're seeing that we can get additional benefit in terms of nitrogen for our next year's crop.
Has anyone thought about corn and coming up with some microbes that would work through whatever the corn discharges and keep it working? So, when you rotate soybeans one year and corn the next year, if you could find microbes that work with both, then the carbon capture would be so much higher. I mean, does anyone think about these things?
Yeah, I think there's a big push on that, and that's like even our buddy Mike, that's what his company does. So my business partner. So there's a variety of companies that are looking at, getting more of those nitrogen fixing microbes that can interact with corn. Now, for the most part, these companies are still talking apply the product one time to that corn, and it helps to fix nitrogen for that corn. And then over the winter time, most farms, of course, don't have a cover crop, and they die. Now, I plant my corn, and I use the product, and then I plant my grass-type cover crop of cereal rye, which would be a cousin of sorts to corn. Corn's a grass, rye is a grass. And I am seeing some carryover the following year.
So are these microbes evolving to interact with the cover crops?
I think so. I don't know that they're evolving. I think they just don't really care. They just they're just bred to, they just want sugar. And they're just like, hey, here's a root that's alive, feed me. And now I don't have all the metagenomics data and stuff to back this up. What we saw and what we observed was that where we applied the product, the following spring, we could see that the grass there, the cover crop, was greener and more robust in the block where we had that microbial product applied versus where we didn't. We could see that with our drone imagery. And I told the company, because of course they say, oh no, there's no carryover, and the microbes, as soon as that corn is dead, they're dead, and it won't carry over.
They just want to sell you more next
That's
year.
right. Yeah, you got to buy it again next year. And I was like, guys, maybe there's not enough for the following years, but like there's definitely still something here, whether it be that the microbe is interacting with now my cover crop and they are still working together, or there was just more nitrogen that they built originally. Now they did die because they don't have corn anymore, and there's just some residual nitrogen sitting out there that my cover crop was able to use. But not necessarily my issue to go and try to get figured out. I've got enough.
I know. I'm
got
just
enough other problems.
I'm curious. So, on the whole soil health topic, I've got a couple questions. 100 years ago in Iowa, when we started, or whenever we started farming, there's been a long period of time. What has been the impact of tillage and rain and wind over decades and decades and decades to the level of the black topsoil that we all take for granted in Iowa?
Degraded it like crazy. I think they say upwards of 50% degraded already. So I mean, we've really lost it. And you can especially see it when you drive around the countryside this time of year, and you look at the tops of the hills, and they look really light colored, and you can basically you can see the subsoil. That at the tops of the hills, that black soil is completely gone. It's down to zero. It's 100% loss. Now that black soil is not totally gone. It's just gone from the top of the hill. It's at the bottom.
It's in the Mississippi and in the Gulf of Mexico.
Part of it's down. Part of it for sure is there. The standard loss from the government, from the Department of Ag and NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service, standard loss of soil, it's called T loss is in the equation. Standard loss is 5 tons of soil per acre per year. Now, I've actually
so over 100 years, that's amazing how much topsoil has run off.
It's something like the size. It's something like the depth of like a penny or of a dime or something like that, or less. But so we don't necessarily see it because it's such a small amount. But yeah, 5 tons per acre every year for the last 150 years. That's a problem. And so now we've got to build that back up and protect that soil and.
So on your farming operations and your early adopters, how much topsoil regeneration have you seen annually from the cover crops and the no-till?
I don't have a great metric to go off of for that. It seems like we're getting a lot.
And over 10 years, would it be several inches?
No, I don't think several inches, but I'm hoping that over time, yeah. But maybe a couple inches, I don't know if we could get it to where it's an inch per decade or per 2 decades or something like that. I think that would be probably pretty darn good.
Well, slowing down the erosion would be a big impact.
Slow the erosion, slow the loss, continue to build up over time, but just being able to cycle and utilize that depth of profile better. I have a project going on with Colorado State University looking at 1 meter deep soil samples. And they had some of those from our farm, and we've still got more than 2 foot of topsoil. Now, I don't know where we started, if it was 3 foot or not. I'm not sure, but we still got a really nice profile there. But what we are seeing on our farm is that we're getting a mixing of soil, where we get some of this nice black soil mixed down at the bottom of that 1 meter deep sample. And I'm getting some of that clay soil from the subsoil, getting that mixed into my upper profile.
So how does nature do that
just from the
mixing from a meter? I mean, that's a lot of shifting.
It's just from the earthworms.
Do you have any idea how that works, Mitchell?
The earthworms. The earthworms are grabbing.
Earthworms?
Oh, yeah. Definitely from the earthworms, and we can see it. Okay, so our earthworms are developing channels that go clear throughout that profile. An earthworm, I think on average, an earthworm will move about 100 feet per year.
100 feet for a worm?
One worm.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay, so 100 feet of channels and mixing and stuff. And those worms are digesting, the soil and plant material and stuff as they go. And what we've seen is along our earthworm channels in the upper profile, we'll see these clay deposits of soil around the outside of the earthworm channel.
Oh, you mean kind of like a mound on the top of it, kind of like a gopher hole where they
so you
take
see,
the dirt
we see
out?
some of that, but this is actually down in the soil, kind of on the edges of their little hole. So they probably deposited it at some point as they were passing through, and they pooped it out.
Yeah.
And then when they came back through or whatever, it was pressed out to the sides, and now you've got this clay deposit that's maybe a centimeter long and around the outside of their channel, and it's very odd. We just started seeing that in the last year or so as we dig, and we have folks at our farm all the time, and it's been very important for Dad and I to have those people out to our farm because we get the shovel out and we're digging around and we're teaching them, and at the same time, of course, it's teaching us about being observant and learning and watching what's happening in our soils. But one of those things being that, we see clay soil because it looks very different. It's a very light orange colored soil mixed in with our dark black colored soil. So it's very obvious that it is completely out of place.
Going on.
And we know that it's from at least 2.5, almost 3 foot down deep in that soil. And now it's getting put up top. And we assume, of course, and now I've got some initial data to show that at probably the same rate that they're pulling that clay soil up, they're putting this black soil back down in replacement.
So is there a metric, or have you thought about a metric, or is it even applicable to look at the earthworm count per?
Yeah.
I mean, you could do
per acre.
You could do a sample,
right.
then multiply that for the acre. And
Yeah,
figure out.
so we can do that. So the last time we did earthworm counts, there was 17 earthworms per cubic foot of soil.
Cubic foot.
Yep.
That
1 foot
seems
by
like
1
a
foot
lot
by
of
1
worms
foot.
in a
17.
foot by foot
Pretty
by
good.
foot.
So we did that. There were some grad students from up at Loris College or something like that, I think is what it was. And they came down and did a variety of different tests and stuff on our farm. And what they did was, dig a 1 foot by 1 foot by 1 foot square and just put that soil onto a tarp. And then they shuffled through the soil and counted the worms. And in all the farms that they trialed, we were tied for first place. This was a couple years ago, and earthworm populations are going to vary quite a bit based on the soil temperature and moisture and all that, because they're going to move and be significantly deeper than just 1 foot in that soil. But at that time, 17 per cubic foot, there's 43,560 square feet in an acre. So about 750,000 earthworms per acre on our farm.
And if you didn't have any earthworms, it would be, the soil would be.
Oh, it'd be a brick, and it would not work at all. But most farms are like that in Iowa. Most farms, you're going through and you're using tillage and disrupting that soil, which of course is destroying their habitat that they just created and their homes and everything that they just created. And they're like, well, now we're screwed. And but also it's sealing off that soil too, so you're not having the air and the water movement that those worms are going to need, especially to create those channels deep down into the soil. One of the other things that we've seen with that is that earthworms are nocturnal in terms of when they come up to the soil surface and come outside, because they don't want to be eaten, of course. And plus they're, it's cooler and they're not burning up in the sunlight of the day. But these earthworms will come up and they will grab plant material and they make it into basically an upside down nest, a little burrow. It's called an earthworm midden. And we, in our farm, all of our residue on our farm gets piled up into these little middens, these little burrows, usually 3 or 4 of them per foot up on the soil surface. And they're usually 3-4 inches in diameter. And they'll be piled up maybe a half an inch to an inch thick. And they'll have all this material just piled up in these little middens. And every single time we can move that material away and you see the big old earthworm hole right there. And a lot of times you'll actually see the earthworm scurry back down into his hole. But they pile up all that material on there just like a squirrel, storing its nuts for the wintertime and stuff, that they'll burrow up all that material. So then during the day, they can just go and grab some of that material and take it back down when they get hungry. But it's, of course, protecting their little house and stuff as well. But really, really wild to see, that activity.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about So as part of the AMPx podcast, we've kind of, we have disruptive innovation, we have the future of work, we have human connection and grounded with nature. And so much of what you're talking about is how humans can interact with nature to have a huge impact on agriculture and the environment. And I don't think most people have any idea what we're talking about in this connection with nature and the relationship between natures and human health and, food health. But talk to us about the cover crops in the no-till and what that organic 14,000 pound organic mass on the surface does in terms of water retention and reduction of soil temperature, because it's not insignificant.
Massive deal. So, but all of this stuff and the connectivity boils back to you are what you eat.
Right.
We learned it when we were little, and our moms teach us that you are what you eat, and what we eat stems back to the soil at some point for pretty much every time. And in that soil, okay, so we're just talking about the earthworms and about 250,000 or 750,000 earthworms per acre, but in our healthy Iowa soils, in 1 teaspoon of soil, there are more microbes than there are people on the earth.
So there's billions. There's over 9 billion microbes in 1 teaspoon of soil.
1 teaspoon of soil.
That's amazing. So what do traditional farming practices do to those microbes? Do they kill them?
Annihilate them, especially the fungal communities and the more complex microorganisms. A single-celled bacteria, they can recuperate and bounce back pretty quickly. They're multiplying all the time and not as susceptible to fertilizers, tillage, some of the things that we do. But it's the more complex systems in the soil food web, like fungus, protozoa, nematodes, some of these larger things. They really have a hard time recuperating when we throw this out of whack. So we've got to leverage all those microbes, enable them to cycle all these nutrients and work for us, create healthier plants to create healthier people. And it's all connected back through. We are made out of the same things that those microbes are: carbon, hydrogen, water, nitrogen, all this stuff. The human body is about 18% carbon. We're mostly water, hydrogen and oxygen. But then for hard element, carbon is our most abundant element, about 18%. Same thing in a corn crop. And the human body is about 9 trillion the human body is 10 trillion cells. 1 trillion cells human, 9 trillion cells microbe. Which freaks me out. I teach farmers about this stuff too. And that's why we're reciting something now. But that freaks me out. The human body, 1 trillion cells human, 9 trillion cells microbe. Because we're mostly all bacteria in our gut and everything. They completely cover us all over the place. And if you were to vaporize all my human cells somehow, you'd still see basically an image of me here for half a second before all my microbes, fell apart, and there's just a puddle of microbes on the ground, I suppose. But kind of freaky how it all works together. It's all the same type of stuff. They're all just so, intertwined together. But if we could better leverage that to be healthier, to eat a correct diet and not throw things out of whack all the time like we love to do, it all stems back. Just like in the soil, we can't disturb it. We got to feed them.
What kills the microbes? Compounds. Is it the insecticides, the pesticides?
All this stuff, yeah. So fungicides, the insecticides would be killing it, but it's also just disrupting that entire soil food web
just
as well.
By tilling it disrupts it.
Oh, for sure.
So
because part of those microbes, would like a lot of oxygen. Part of them don't want a lot of oxygen. Part of them want that warm soil at the top of the surface. Part of them want it cooler, like it is down below. And when you disrupt that, you're disrupting them, and they don't want to be there, and most of them are going to die. But the big issue as well is that, back to the carbon and your question, when we overexcite that soil microbiome and incorporate too much oxygen, those microbes are going nuts because they're breathing in oxygen and they're in hyper performance mode, just like when we get a lot of oxygen and stuff too. And so they're overexcited and they eat too much of the carbon. and they eat more of the complex carbon molecules, like what's in the organic matter, the more stable forms.
Mm-hmm.
And because they're eating that carbon and they're breathing that back off, it's going
they're
up in
putting
the
it
atmosphere.
back in the environment way too fast.
And that's right. And if there's no plant there to capture it, we cause the greenhouse gas issues that we've caused.
Oh.
So that's how this all cycles back through, and why what we're doing can be the solution here. Is the typical is to only have a living plant for a couple months out of the year, then disrupt that soil, introduce a lot of oxygen, introduce all that residue, and the microbes will eat it. And that's why we did tillage. We got a bunch of residue. We need to get rid of all that residue so we can plant into it easier next year. So we're not planting into a bunch of material and the soil dries out and all that. Well, that has worked for a long time, but now we have better technology and equipment to plant into a undisturbed soil, a no-till soil that has a residue on it. We have the technology to do it today, like we wouldn't have had decades ago when my family was doing tillage as well. But by overexciting that system, we get some short-term gains in terms of plantability and yield and all this stuff, because there is a lot of carbon being exuded, and the most abundant element in a corn crop is carbon. So by utilizing tillage, we get a lot of extra carbon. The plants respond. We get nice big yields. But because we are doing a lot of that disturbance at the wrong time, we lose most of that carbon. And now over time, we've degraded it down and are starting to run out. And it's actually already the most limiting nutrient for yield, besides if we have to have water, number one. But the most limiting element beyond that is carbon.
Wow.
And that is not being talked about by the farmers at all.
So, just so our guests understand, at the field day last year, your dad was doing this demo, but Mitchell was talking about the cover crops that can be rye, that can be 4 or 5 feet tall. So what the farmers do is they'll go plant the soybeans or the corn right into this rye was 4 feet tall. So 4 or 5 feet tall. So they'll kind of knock the rye over and break it at the ground, so it'll all be laying on the ground. Then they'll plant the soybeans and the corn right into this 5 foot rye that's laying on the ground. And your dad he took some soil samples, and I think it was in the mid 90s during the field day, and we were out there 2:00 in the afternoon, and he took a temperature of the soil, and I think the soil was like 74 or 5 degrees on a 95 degree day, because of all of this cover crop and all of this organic matter. And I'm trying to remember, what's your experience on water retention in the top foot of soil when it gets really hot in the late summer and everyone else is worried about losing their crop productivity?
Huge deal. This year on our farm, we had 4 inches of rain on our farm this year. Usually we get...
In the whole season?
The whole season, 4 inches. We were, if you look at the drought map, even today, our farm is right on the northern edge. So Washington County, Jefferson County, Van Buren, that area is super dry. And we were right in the middle of it and just got nothing for rain this year. And our soybean yields were still above average. Our corn wasn't great. We definitely lost out a little bit on corn, but we are early into this process still. And it shows we were able to be pretty resilient. We don't have a crop insurance claim. We are not a burden on the taxpayer, but our yield still took some of a hit. But we have seen a drastic improvement in our resiliency. So a couple of metrics to your point there. Number one, on the temperature thing, in order to maintain that moisture in the soil, we can't evaporate it off right away, which is where most folks have a problem, one of the problems. And one of the days that I was playing around with the thermometer, it was 91 degrees outside. Mm-hmm. But underneath all that cover crop residue, where my soybeans were, it was 76 degrees. Perfect. Above the cover crop, where it was radiating off heat, it was 100 degrees. Mm-hmm. And I took over on some bare soil that didn't have cover crop on it. It was 126 degrees. We start frying microbes and they start dying off whenever it's above 105.
Well,
And
the
their
plants
activity
probably start dying at 126 degrees with no moisture in the
at
soil. though.
86 degrees, they shut down.
86 degrees.
86 degrees. So and we accumulate that, and there's calculations for that. It's called heat units. So corn is growing and metabolizing and functioning anywhere between 50 and 86 degrees. So when that soil is burned up, even if it's not that bad outside, but if that soil is burned up because of the sunlight on it, that plant is not functioning correctly. And you are not getting carbon in the soil. You are not producing yield. That corn is in defense mode. Okay, so we're seeing that now with that residue to basically provide insulation for the soil, just like we do in our houses and stuff to keep it from burning up. So we're not evaporating off as much of that moisture. Other item is we've got to get that moisture in the ground. The 4 inches of rain that we got this year is super low. There's been a lot of the times, the last couple of years, usually in the month of May, we've been getting 12 to 15 inches in the month of May alone.
Wow.
Yeah, the last couple of years. So this year was very, very dry. And again, most of the state of Iowa had great conditions. We were just in the pocket this year that was bad. Across the country, the average water infiltration rate is a 1/2 of an inch of infiltration per hour.
1/2 inch of absorption of water per hour. So if you got more than a 1/2 inch of rain, let's say you got 3 inches of rain in an hour.
Yep.
Most 2.5 inches is going to run off and go someplace else and not be
to the
captured.
Mississippi and everything else and cause flooding like we've seen in the city of Cedar Rapids, or like we saw a couple years ago on the Missouri. If we're not able to get that water in, it's going off to the side and carrying with it residue, pesticide residue, soil, everything's going. Okay, the average soil can only infiltrate 1/2 of an inch per hour. On our farm, we can do 4 inches of infiltration in less than 5 minutes.
So if we got a 10 or 12 inch rain in an hour, you're going to absorb
take
all of that.
All of it in.
And there's no erosion because the water's staying and just going down into
That's
the
exactly
earth.
right. Yep.
So
it doesn't go this way, it's going this way and actually absorbing into that soil. So we can infiltrate 1 inch of rain in 6 seconds. So a major issue for a lot of farmers is that we get heavy rains in the springtime like we typically do in Iowa and like we're getting more and more. And a lot of that soil, a lot of that water can't get in, so it ponds on top, or it either runs off or it just ponds up because a lot of farms are flat and it just sits there. Then it drowns out the crop. And now you got these big circles out there of drowned out crop, and you have to go back in and replant so that you don't have that bare spot in your field. But the other key piece to the water retention, to your question again, is we can now infiltrate 4 inches of rainfall per hour. We haven't had to replant at all in the last 4 years, I think we're up to now. We're not have to use crop insurance and these kind of things because the water gets in, but also 1% organic matter in the soil holds 26,000 gallons of water. And on our soils, a lot of them now are upwards of 5%. A lot of soils in the state are around 3%. So 3% organic matter soil can hold.
So you have 130 gallons of water you're holding just because of the organic matter in an acre. 130 gallons. That's a lot of water.
A lot of water. So that's why with only 4 inches of rainfall this year, number one, we've got good infiltration to get that water in. Number two, we don't have as much evaporation to lose that water going this way. And number three, we have better organic matter to hold onto that water. And it holds it because organic matter is extremely negatively charged, just in its polarity. Very negative charged. So is clay and clay particles in the soil. The soil itself is negatively charged. And of course, water is polar, a positive and a negative. So that positive side will bind with the negative charge in the soil and hold on. But also organic matter, because it's because it's mostly carbon, it creates kind of a lattice structure and like a charcoal kind of structure in the soil. So it's got some porosity to physically hold on to some of that water as well. But yeah, back to, okay, why aren't farmers doing all this stuff? Well, most of the time we get too much water. Most of the time we don't have these drought issues. Well, now it's becoming more prevalent, and especially out west and places, they utilize irrigation water from the ground to offset the lack of water problem. Well, now the aquifers are drying up.
You look at the sandhills in Nebraska, and those things are going dry.
Yeah.
I
so
mean,
now they're
pretty soon
really
they're
going
going
to
to stop farming because
That's right.
there is no groundwater.
Well, there's no groundwater, and then there's no organic matter. There's no ability to hold on to that water that you do get when you can pump it out of the ground and put it onto that field. Or if it does happen to rain, that ground is bare and it just evaporates off, or there's no infiltration. It doesn't get in the ground anyway, and it goes to the creek, and you don't get to use it.
So out west in Nebraska and places like that, Mitchell, are they past the point of no return where they can't? It's too late to start restorative agriculture.
No,
it's too late to start building organic matter and cover crops and start holding water and start regenerating the groundwater, because without water we have a hard time as humans.
It's going to be tough. It's going to be tougher for them, but I still think we're okay if we get going here now. But it's going to take some time because they're degraded to such an extreme point. You've got to come back a long way to make it work. So, but the other tough piece of this is, okay, so how do they restore those soils? Well, we got to get that organic matter built up. We got to get the carbon. We got to get more microbial activity. Well, how do we do that? We got to have living plants. Well, how do we get living plants? Well, it takes water.
Yeah.
So you got to have the water to get the living plants to be able to build the soil so you can hold more water. So you got to use, it takes money to make money kind of thing. It takes water and it takes plants to be able to build up soil health and be able to get the system to work on its own. But so it's going to take some time because of that. The water is limited, so you're not going to be able to grow this 5-foot tall cover crop every single year like I can mostly grow here. Mm-hmm. I mean, we don't grow it every year. It's only on the soybeans. But point being is that I can grow a cover crop fairly consistently here, and we don't use any irrigation on our farm. We get it all from the sky and from natural rainfall. And in a year like this where we don't get a lot of rainfall, yeah, it's not a great year. But most of the time, where we are in Iowa, the standard rainfall is about 35 inches of rain per year.
And you got 4 last year.
We got 4. Well, that was over the growing season. That was from April to harvest. Now we've been getting some more rain, and with snow snow contributes to that 35 inches as well. But yeah, it was extremely dry.
So how many of your neighbors don't use regenerative agriculture that had total losses because of the drought and had to file insurance claims?
Well, I'm sure there was a lot of insurance claim, and that information, there's some public information about that. Some of it's private and all that. So then the numbers aren't out yet, so I don't know exactly. But I don't know that anybody had a complete failure, because our hybrids and our systems have evolved so much that even in bad conditions, you still don't have a failure. But 50% yield loss? Oh, yeah. We had 20% yield loss.
So they're looking at 120 bushels per acre for corn instead of 240?
That's right. I was with one of my guys. He was doing like 130 some bushels with way more inputs than what we had. And now they are starting to come this route and make this change. But it is going to take time. So what's interesting about Washington County, nationwide, I said there's 4% of farms using cover crops, about 30% using no-till. And those are from the 2017 census numbers. We'll be getting new census numbers here very soon. But 4% and 30%. In Washington County, we're close to 20% cover crop and 75% no-till.
Why is that? Is that because of your innovation and leadership in the county?
No, I've helped a little bit, and have a couple, but it's more so because in my dad's generation and my granddad's generation, they started working on reducing tillage and thinking about conservation. So it's been a movement that's already 50 years old.
In your area?
In my area. So there was a movement here of reducing tillage, maybe looking at diversifying and adding some other systems. And there was some folks using some cover crops in the 80s. They didn't necessarily know it was a cover crop. They probably weren't calling it a cover crop. They were doing it for feed, or for diversifying or what have you. But they were playing around with some of this stuff in the 80s. Now we've found out that, hey, there's something to this. There's some benefits you can have here, and we just have to harness that and put dollars into our pocket. And the biggest thing now that I've learned that I teach all my farmers and why we are growing is we have to brand these practices correctly. It's one of the biggest opportunities in ag and in this regenerative movement. Farmers have been told and have been marketed to them that no-till and cover crops are defensive tools.
Right.
To defend against water quality problems, defend against erosion, defend against that 5 tons per acre of loss and the problems downstream. Well, when you're looking at it as a defensive tool, it's hard to put that to the bottom line because it's really hard to quantify dollars of soil saved or hard to directly visualize it. Over 150 years, yeah, it adds up. But right now, year to year, in my ability to pay back the banker year to year, doesn't necessarily directly impact my pocketbook.
Mm-hmm.
So we show farmers that these practices need to be offensive management tools. That these practices, this is part of my fertilizer program and my nutrient cycling. This is part of my nutrient stabilizer program to suck up any excess nutrients that I maybe didn't lose last year.
Right.
This is part of my herbicide program to suppress weeds. It's part of my crop insurance program so I don't have to replant. It's part of my, carbon building program now so I can connect with the consumer and grow low carbon commodities. It's so many of these offensive outcomes that now directly map to my P&L and directly map to my expenses, which are at an all-time high. So if I can reduce those expenses as a direct implication of doing these practices, now it changes this mentality that I'm not just doing this practice or planting a cover crop because there's some cost share dollars to do it, or sure, I'll do it as a last minute kind of thing because, sure, I'll help out and not get yelled at by the folks in town because I'm polluting the water. Instead, it changes that no, I need to make sure that I get that cover crop done and get it done right, because it's going to help make me money next year. And that change, I only realized maybe 2 years ago now, but that is the ultimate that we've got to be pushing on to be able to actually get 1 million farmers to do this and to actually create massive change. We just need to now get back to the beginning here, scaling this with AI and technology.
Quick question. What's the break-even point on corn?
So
bushels per acre.
Yeah,
you said 240 is standard.
240 would be kind of the standard. In today's commodity prices, I think most farms would be in the 180, 190 kind of bushels per acre. I think on our farm we're like 120 or something like that. I need to.
So even though your yields were down to 140, you still made $20 an acre.
Oh yeah, still made money. Yeah, yep. But and every single farm is going to be very, very different. And a lot of farms, like even on mine, like having a really great answer is tough because there's so many moving parts to it.
Right.
But we do have some of those tools that we are building now within TopSoil to help our farmers to know exactly what that number is.
Let's talk a little bit about headwinds, Mitchell. So the $106+ per acre in savings is mostly in fertilizer, and how much of that is nitrogen?
A pretty decent chunk. So nitrogen, a lot of farms can cut their nitrogen by at least 20% and be totally fine and not lose yield. And
so if you get 240 acres of corn, you probably traditionally you'd use 240 pounds of nitrogen.
Yeah, for the bushel.
So
you could easily get it down to 200, 180. We're at like 155.
Let me ask you this. How does a typical traditional agronomist get paid? If they're not doing cover crops and no-till, how do they get paid from the farmers?
By selling the inputs.
So they get paid, so they're incentivized to sell more nitrogen. They want to sell 240 an acre because they're going to tell them that if they don't, they're going to have reduced yields.
Yeah.
So there's a huge ecosystem industry conflict of interest because the people advising the farmers,
that's right,
who they maybe have trusted for multiple generations,
that's right,
are telling them you can't back off of nitrogen because your yields are going to go down.
That's right.
So how do you overcome this headwind where there's huge conflict of interest between the fertilizer companies and the whole regenerative ag movement?
It's one of the biggest barriers in the space right now. And one of the biggest opportunities, though, too, because you're exactly right. Most of the advice that a farmer is getting today, at least throughout the Midwest, there's different pockets where it's more independent. But for the most part, by and large, the farmer gets their advice from the person who's selling them the inputs. Usually from the ag retail location or the seed guy or whatever. And they might not be selling you everything, but it's typically you're getting the advice from the person who's selling you the tool. And yeah, they make their bonus and make their commission based on volume sold, not based on me making profit and me making yield or me being sustainable. They make money based on selling the product and selling bulk. And on certain products, of course, I'm sure they're getting better margin than others and better commissions and all that. And the big opportunity and what I'm looking at, what I'm trying to provide disruption on is what is that person's business model in sustainability and in carbon. And I do believe that there is some where if I'm creating carbon credits or low carbon grain or sustainably sourced and I'm getting a margin, they should be able to get a cut of that. And the better I do, the more they can get paid. And that's what we're looking at with Continuum Ag. Today, I charge a farmer a per acre fee.
Right.
And then any value that I gain for them, they keep all of it. They just have to, I just have to sell them well enough that I help them to create the value on the other side. And we do that with data and our tracking and all that. So we've been able to prove we can charge money to help a farmer be more sustainable, be more profitable. And I believe we can package that program so that ag retail person can go and sell it. They do know that farmer. They've got their phone number. They know their fields.
So you incentivize the retail people to get
a new business
share in part of the win versus being totally cut out.
That's correct. I think we need to.
Well, I don't know how else you win, because part of your problem is you got to build credibility and trust. And the people selling them the fertilizer are going to say, that Continuum Ag, don't believe them. It's going to be a disaster. You're not going to save $106 an acre. Right. It's going to cost you $120 an acre. You're not going to make any money this year because you don't get the yield. So
I'm going to sit down with them, and then the next phone call is going to be to that guy, and they're going to say, hey, I just had these guys here. They were talking about this regenerative ag stuff. It sounds like a pretty good deal. What do you think? They're going to say, oh, yeah, no, that's a bunch of crap. Don't listen to them, whatever. You need to buy this new thing. And we're going to be continually battling back and forth. Now, of course, I've seen it. And it's not even about drinking the Kool-Aid. It's about it is better. And so I know that eventually they'll come.
I mean, the data
tells that's why our
story.
business is growing, is because they are figuring that out. And they are coming. And they know that local person, they're not necessarily selling them all this stuff to be malicious. But it's how they make their money. And it's how they make their bonus. And it's what their metrics are. Because they're reporting back on their quarterly metrics or weekly metrics and sales metrics stuff. They're reporting it back to the rest of their company. This is a business. And we just have to help them to monetize a different metric. And I think we will. And but that's also why I have some of my customers now include Bayer, Land O'Lakes, Coke, some of the biggest players in agriculture and the biggest traditional ag players. And they're coming saying, hey, we need to start figuring out what our business model is going to be in this other thing, because we're not going to make as much money doing what we've been doing. John Deere as well. They're not going to make as much money selling these big tillage equipment and selling these massive high horsepower tractors. It's not going to happen.
Well, let's come back to those collaborations in a minute. I'd like to explore headwinds a little bit more. So my next question is, of these family farms, these 1,000-acre farms, what did it look like 20 years ago? And my question really is how much of a consolidation is going on with corporate farms coming in, buying the small family farms? I mean, look at combines now. You can spend $250,000 on a combine. And if you only have 1,000 acres, the capital cost.
If you're spending $250,000 on a combine, you're getting a heck of a deal. Try more like $750,000 to $1 million on a combine.
So I mean, the capital cost of being a small farmer, you almost have to have someone else come in and be your partner.
I was talking about this to somebody the other day. If you wanted to go start your own farm and be a row crop farmer here in Southeast Iowa, and that was going to be your thing, and you were going to make enough money to have that as a full-time deal, like for real, and feed a family. I don't know if you could do it and get started and actually make money on it for anything less than $10 million.
So that would
And
be
even
1,000
that'd be a
acres
small-
plus the
no.
equipment.
That's about 350 acres and the equipment and all that.
Oh.
I don't know if you could make it on that.
But what
You
would
probably
it
have
take
to have like double, like my family, like 700 acres, $20 million.
to get started?
I mean, so, and then you might be able to finance it, you know, and not put up all that capital yourself.
Well, interest rates have just
Yeah,
tripled
now
in the last
7%.
year.
And luckily in agriculture, we get deals on our interest rates and stuff. And I was able to, I bought some land when I graduated from Iowa State a couple years ago, small 40 acres, right around the corner from mom and dad's home farm. It's one of those where it's, you know, it comes up for sale once a lifetime, and that's it. Like, got to do it. You got to jump on it. And I got a solid deal. It was the appropriate price, and I was able to work directly with the seller. So we cut out a lot of the middleman fees, and she got a good deal, and I got a good deal. And but it was a fair, appropriate deal. Today, that land is doubled in value, probably pretty easily. I bought it for about $9,000 an acre, and I guarantee I can easily sell it for $18,000.
This is in 4 years.
Yeah. So, and I was able to participate in a beginning farmer loan through the government for a low interest loan. They're still making money and still got to pay it back with interest, but it is subsidized through the federal government to just that the interest rate isn't that high, it's just not taxed. The gain on the interest just isn't taxed at the bank because of a beginning farmer loan. Now there's a limit on how much you can borrow in that program.
Right.
It's like $500,000 or something like that.
Right.
So nowhere close to the 20 million that you need to go and start a new big farm. But
Wow.
and of course, then that's only the land that I had. Luckily, I've got my parents with the equipment and with the know-how and all this, and I've got my own things going on that there's no way I could make enough money to support a family just on that 40 acres.
So what does the family farm look like in 10,
Yeah.
20 years in
So
Iowa?
it's actually back to what you were talking with consolidation. It's going to happen.
Has it already started?
Oh, big time. I mean, I don't know what those metrics are. You know, if the percentage of folks that were involved in agriculture versus today, it's 1% or less. You know, size of family farms, the amount of family farms just continues to go down like crazy. And I don't see that changing. I mean, I would love for it to. I would love for more small family farms and you know, everybody's old McDonald's farm and kumbaya. I would love that.
Right.
It's not reality. It's not going to happen.
So my guess is that the family farmer with 500, 700, 1,000 acres is a lot more resistant to change. A corporate farm that's come into Iowa and owns 200,000, 300,000, 400,000 acres.
Yeah.
They're probably looking at this Regenerative ag stuff and saying, "Oh, we can save $100 an acre on 300,000 acres that they've got planted." The numbers are huge.
There's a couple different things there. So, one, I think that typical family farm, that's the 1,000-acre average kind of farm, they either need to really focus on efficiencies, like what we've done, lower your cost of production to improve your margin because you only have so many acres. We got to compete against everybody else that is those larger farms. So we got to improve our efficiencies, and that has incentivized us to change. If you're going to stay the same, you got to figure out how to keep growing because you're working on small margins, but also you're currently incentivized to just kind of hold your breath and stay the same because you got enough cash flow coming in because commodity prices are good enough. You can kind of keep on going, keep playing the game. In my area, a lot of farms have diversified by adding livestock, hogs in sheds and stuff. And now those pigs are owned by other local family operations. They're very large family farms, but they still are family farms. And so diversifying that way instead of trying to buy more land, which isn't necessarily available. Less than 2% of the ag land in the state of Iowa changes hands on an annual basis. Less than 2% churn annually. So there's not a whole lot out there. That's
So
up
what
for sale.
drives the value of farmland in Iowa? Is it all commodity pricings and yields?
Yeah, commodity pricing is a big one, but a lot of it's proximity and availability. It's simple supply and demand. In our area, it's does that farm have a hog building on it? If it doesn't have a hog building on it, now a diversified farm that has land and pigs, they could buy the land and build a hog barn on it, and a hog barn cash flows very quickly. You get paid a cash rate based on the head space, and also now you have the land you can put the manure on. You can grow the feed for those pigs, put the manure back on that field, and you got to have more acres to build more barns because it's very regulated.
Okay.
You can't just build as many hog barns as you want. There's a lot of regulation on how many animals you can have in a certain area because you have to have somewhere for the manure, and so it's very regulated there. But a couple things back to your question there too on these large farms. I've been spending a lot of time, especially last week. I was out visiting farms in Iowa and in Arkansas. The smallest farm that we went and visited was a 9,000 acre operation. They were all between, a lot of these farms I'm working with now are between, a lot of farms between 5,000 and 40,000 acres. Big operations. Now they are all family farms. They are all owned and operated by the family. Now they're a corporation, so is our farm. Right. So is my farm itself it's an LLC, MT Hora Farms LLC. Legally, it's a corporation, but it's still a family farm. I think it's 90% of the farms, and 90% of the farms are corporate. They're entities that for tax purposes and liability purposes and all that, and doing it the right legal way. But it's something like 98% of farms in the country are still family farms, family owned, family operated. Now some of them are huge and very much act like a corporate type of farm. They have employees, they have payroll taxes, withholdings, they have corporate goals, and they have websites, and they have offices and stuff like that. I see more of that as going to happen, where it is the larger family farm ownership and expansion of that. And it's actually one of the things I see as the opportunity for our farm and my long-term plan, that there's going to be fewer farmers and even fewer that really think like a corporation. Most of them still think like a family farm, how we think about it, of it's a couple hundred acres and kind of a lifestyle hobby kind of thing, but it's not. It's a business in that it makes some money and it's what pays the bills, but they're not running it like a business.
Right.
Like a business guys like you and I would run it. That's how most of the family farms are just, it's a lifestyle company and you farm because that's what you've always done. And I'd laugh about that too, that I'd say, I'm 7th generation farmer. Very few other occupations do say you're 3rd generation or 5th generation, this or that, or 7th generation, like very few.
Right.
You don't say very few would you say I'm 3rd generation doctor, or, you don't say that, or 2nd generation postman or whatever. Like, you don't say that. You might be, but in agriculture, that's like a big deal. That all farmers, when they introduce, I'm 5th generation farmer from yada yada, like that's what we do. But I think the opportunity again for the future being, there's going to be fewer people to run these operations, fewer folks to work on these operations. We're going to need autonomy and the robotics, and there's going to be fewer decision makers, so we're going to need more scalable, actionable data. And there's going to be fewer resources to be able to get it all done. And I don't, a big passion of mine is, and why I do what I do, is to put those dollars back into family farm pockets so that they are in position to expand and to be able to acquire that next door neighbor when they do come up for sale, because they don't have somebody that's going to come back and take over because they go make more money in town. That couple 100-acre farm isn't big enough for that young person to come back and just do that when they can go work in town 40 hours a week, kinda, and have vacation and insurance and all this stuff and take weekends off. You can't do that on the farm. It's all day, every day, No. It's not a very enticing lifestyle for most young people. Except that if you're looking at it in a light that I do, where it's super exciting because of technology and regeneration and working with Mother Nature, not against her. Like, I think that does bring opportunity for young people to be involved and to have that connection back to the land and stuff. But I think in order to do it, because of the high capital costs and stuff, it's going to be a blend of these things where you're going to have more and more institutional and corporate ownership and basically investors being involved in these operations, but you still got to have somebody there to run it. And I think that's an opportunity for our farm. I could bring in investment money to have the capital to go and grow to a larger operation. Now, it's not going to have really exciting returns like a tech company or whatever, but more stable, long-term dividends being paid back, sure. And to be able to have the technology to diversify the operation and be able to expand, and I think there's opportunity for that. And my role with Continuum is to make sure that we've got a data platform and systems there to help that person who is now running a massive operation. And what I hope that it does is that young person can be involved in this more corporate or institutional owned land, and they can be earning some significant pay by helping to run and operate the land, because somebody's got to do the work, and they can utilize that to get good equipment, have good technology, utilize these things, and deploy that on their own family operation as well, maybe earn in with sweat equity or earn into this more corporate land, but also have the capital needed to grow their own family operation. So I think it's going to be a blend. I don't love that. I would love it to be all, small family farms and
Yeah.
but I just don't see it as, it's not going to happen.
Well, and it's an evolution of society, and fewer people have to feed the world. And
Yeah.
this has been very exciting, and it's been great. Thanks for joining us on the AMPx Podcast. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Make sure not to miss future episodes, and please rate the show wherever you get your podcast. Thanks to our awesome production team, Lindsay Soderberg, social and digital marketing, Taylor Higgins, video production, and Seth Nielsen, marketing. See you next time.